Message of peace. Pope Francis continues his trip to Japan by speaking out against nuclear weapons. We're on the ground with a report. Change of command. The top U.S. Navy official has been fired after a clash with the Pentagon and President Donald Trump. Elections in Hong Kong. After months of pro-democracy protests, the former British territory held a vote this past weekend. We have analysis. And 'tis the season. The White House and U.S. Capitol are beginning to prepare for Christmas. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, November 25th, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby. The Secretary of Defense says he fired the Secretary of the Navy after losing trust in him. The military shakeup is connected to a case that President Donald Trump has taken a personal interest. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Wyatt. President Trump intervened to prevent the Navy from demoting a Navy SEAL who was accused of war crimes in Iraq. In the end, the SEAL keeps his job, but the Navy Secretary loses his.
Navy Secretary Richard Spencer was ousted this weekend. Defense Secretary Mark Esper says he lost confidence in the Navy Secretary after Spencer proposed a secret deal with the White House behind his back.
You don't go to your boss's boss and petition without letting your boss know.
Navy SEAL Eddie Gallagher's case sparked the controversy.
He was a great fighter. He was one of the ultimate fighters. Tough guy. These are not weak people. These are tough people.
He was convicted in July of discrediting the armed services for posing next to the body of a dead ISIS fighter. He was demoted, but President Trump reinstated his rank last week against the advice of the defense secretary. The president tweeted yesterday, "I was not pleased with the way that Navy SEAL Eddie Gallagher's trial was handled by the Navy. He was treated very badly, but despite this, was completely exonerated on all major charges. I then restored Eddie's rank." But Spencer says he was ousted because, quote, "I no longer share the same understanding with the commander-in-chief who appointed me in regards to the key principle of good order and discipline." Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer is coming to the Navy Secretary's defense.
I believe he did the right thing. He should be proud. Good order, morale, and discipline in the armed services have to transcend politics.
Today, President Trump is moving on to other military business. He honored the dog, Conan, who served in the operation that ended with the death of ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi.
We're very honored to have Conan here and to have given Conan a certificate and an award.
President Trump tweeted that he will nominate the ambassador to Norway, Ken Braithwaite, to replace Spencer. The president calls Braithwaite a man of great achievement and success. He is a retired Navy Rear Admiral. Wyatt?
White House correspondent Mark Irons reporting. Thanks, Mark. House Democrats are following the lead of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who's calling on members of her party to move expeditiously ahead with their efforts to impeach President Trump. There could be several steps along the way, including a Judiciary Committee vote, a House floor vote, and potentially a Senate trial.
Adjourned.
Democrats on the House Intelligence Committee believe they have enough evidence to write a report and move forward.
This is not a decision I will be making alone.
But it's still unclear whether they will hear any last-minute testimony, especially from the president's allies, who have so far refused to testify, including Vice President Mike Pence, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, Acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney, former National Security Advisor John Bolton, and personal attorney Rudy Giuliani.
Yes, we'd love to have these witnesses come in, but we're not willing to simply allow them to wait us out, to stall this proceeding when the facts are already overwhelming.
Republicans argue Democrats haven't made their case. North Carolina Republican Mark Meadows tweets today, "Not only does the Democrats' impeachment case fall short on the current fact pattern, they're withholding facts that make their case even worse." The articles of impeachment are expected to focus on Ukraine. Democrats are also debating an overall abuse of power article, plus obstruction of Congress and obstruction of justice. Over the first 2 weeks of December, after receiving the intelligence panel's report, it's expected the Judiciary Committee will hold hearings and vote on articles of impeachment, sending it to the House floor. There, Democrats will be looking for Republican support.
I would hope that there will be Republicans who will be willing to step forward and say whatever the political consequences, If this was Barack Obama had done this, they would have voted to impeach him in a heartbeat with a fraction of the evidence. It shouldn't matter.
Democrats aim to vote on impeachment by Christmas. They would then appoint impeachment managers for a Senate trial to take place in 2020. Billionaire and former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg formally launches a bid to be the Democratic nominee for president, and he's already receiving criticism from others in the field.
He has decided, because he's worth $55 billion, that he can run for president of the United States and spend more money on TV ads, I suspect, than any candidate in the history of the United States.
Bloomberg officially announced his candidacy yesterday on a campaign website. The 77-year-old is one of the richest men in the world. He says he's running for president to defeat Donald Trump and rebuild America. His campaign will feature a massive advertising campaign with commercials in key states across the country. Vice President Mike Pence made an unannounced visit to Iraq over the weekend. He met Iraqi Kurdistan president and other lawmakers while spelling out the Trump administration's vision for the region.
We want to see an Iraq that is free of the malign influence of Iran and is also respecting the rights and the voices of all of its people.
The visit was aimed to reassure U.S. allies in the fight against the Islamic State. The Vice President and Second Lady, Karen Pence, also served a Thanksgiving dinner to U.S. troops in Iraq. Iran is accusing the United States of interfering in its internal affairs. A foreign ministry official says the U.S. should not be supporting the nationwide protests going on in Tehran. Last week, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo asked demonstrators to send videos of security forces cracking down on anti-government rallies. Iran says the request shows the U.S. is backing the rioters. 2 priests have been found guilty of sexually abusing deaf children at a Catholic school in Argentina. Both were sentenced to more than 40 years in prison. They were convicted of misconduct against 10 former students. The priests had maintained their innocence. Pope Francis, who is from Argentina, has not commented publicly about the case. The Vatican Secretary of State says he is responsible for arranging a controversial loan to buy a bankrupt Italian hospital. Cardinal Pietro Parolin also says he helped arrange a loan from a U.S.-based organization to cover the purchase, even though it could not be repaid. Cardinal Pietro Parolin was speaking exclusively to Catholic News Agency. Now, for more on this story, including why Cardinal Parolin is speaking out now, visit our partners at CatholicNewsAgency.com. Pope Francis is scheduled to return to the Vatican tomorrow, ending his week-long trip to Asia. Today, the Holy Father celebrated his last public Mass in a packed Tokyo stadium. A large crowd of faithful cheered as the Holy Father entered the stadium, taking photos and waving flags and banners. The Holy Father also met with the Emperor of Japan today. Catholic News Agency's Hannah Brockhaus has more from Tokyo.
I'm right now in the Tokyo Dome in Tokyo, Japan, where Pope Francis entered a few minutes ago and where Mass will be beginning shortly. I'm here with 50,000 Japanese Catholics and others on the final full day of Pope Francis' trip in Asia. Yesterday was an emotional day when Pope Francis visited Nagasaki and Hiroshima. In Nagasaki, he honored the hundreds of Japanese Catholic martyrs who died during 200 years of persecution. He also spoke out against nuclear arms, and in Hiroshima held a peace meeting where he called for an end to the use and the possession of nuclear weapons and asked for funds that are used in arms races to be put towards care of the poor. This morning, he also met with Japanese young people. He asked them not to become spiritual zombies and to spend time with God in prayer and to spend time with their family and friends in real social interactions. He also met with survivors of the 2011 triple disaster in Japan, when there was an earthquake, a tsunami, and a nuclear power plant destruction in the same day. He also met with the Japanese emperor and Japanese authorities and with the prime minister. In Tokyo, Hannah Brockhaus, EWTN News Nightly.
The head of the Pontifical Institute for Foreign Missions, or PIME, in the United States says the Pope's trip to Japan is bringing great joy and confidence to Japanese Catholics. Regional Superior Father Ken Mazur writes in an editorial in the PIME magazine Mission World, quote, "There is no doubt that this will be a boost for them." Father Ken Mazur joins us now from Detroit. Father, welcome into EWTN News Nightly. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
So, Father, you spent more than a decade in Japan serving as a missionary priest. Can you give us some insight to the church there?
Sure. Well, I was there for 13 years, mostly in the Diocese of Yokohama. The Catholic Church is very small, less than 1/3 of 1%. They take it very personally. It's a very personal relationship that they have with God. And so, you know, most people probably don't even know where we are, where we exist, who we are. Many people, many Japanese in general, would know the name of Jesus Christ, but the church is very much an evangelizing church. We try very hard, but we're still in the context of sowing the seeds. It's only been 450 some years since the church was initiated in Japan, and it's a very small church.
Well, like you say, Japanese Catholics are so small, such a small percentage of the population, but they have been very welcoming to the Pope. Can you explain how this trip will be a boost for Catholics and why, in general, this visit is so important?
Certainly. I hear from all of my friends through social media how excited they are that the Pope is coming, because in their daily lives, they may be the only member of their family that's a Catholic. They may be the only person that even knows that they're Catholic. They may not tell others, but they get a chance to see that there are other Catholics around, that there are other people and that share their faith. And then the Holy Father, of course, will booster their faith, make them feel very much alive. The Japanese love to get together. They were waving flags and yelling out his name, and it will just help their faith and solidify what it is that they believe in.
Because you have spent time in Japan, as you know, two of the most popular religions in Japan are Buddhist and Shinto. Tell us a little bit about those religions.
Well, Shinto is the national religion, but it's more of a philosophy. It might not be quite a religion. And then Buddhism, I would say most of the people would say that they were Buddhist, although Buddhist is not something that you practiced in your daily life. You don't go to the Buddhist temple on weekends. You don't. You might go there for New Year's or perhaps the blessing of your car or something like that. But in their daily life, religion is pretty non-existent. Shinto, again, as I said, it's a little bit of religion when you want to get married, and if you have enough money, you might go to the Shinto shrine to get married, to get blessed by one of their priests. But once again, it's not part of their daily life. It doesn't affect them.
As I mentioned, you are the regional superior of PIME in the U.S. What exactly is PIME, and where are some of the PIME missionaries in the world?
Sure. PIME is a Society of Apostolic Life. We were founded in Italy in 1850. Europe was having a big mission explosion at that time. The missionaries of Paris, the missionaries of France. And so we were founded as the Italian Missionary Society. We're very similar to Maryknoll. Maryknoll started in 1910, about 60 years after we are. And we work mostly in Asia. That was our original intent, was to go to Asia. We have worked in China, in India, in Thailand, where the Pope also just visited, in Japan, in the Philippines. We also have a few places in Africa, South America as well. We're in 19 different countries around the world. And we're a small society. We have about a little less than 500 people worldwide.
Well, I'm sure our viewers at EWTN will be praying for your missionary work. As Pope Francis has said, it's so important to reach out to the peripheries. Father Ken Mazur, Regional Superior of PIME in the United States, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Coming up, pro-democracy lawmakers dominate the elections in Hong Kong, what it means for the former British territory. Hong Kong's pro-democracy opposition captured a landslide victory in local elections this weekend. The win is being seen as a rebuke to Chief Executive Carrie Lam over her handling of protests that have divided the semi-autonomous Chinese territory. More than 70% of Hong Kong's registered voters cast ballots in the city's only fully democratic elections, far exceeding turnout 4 years ago. Pro-democracy lawmakers say they swept nearly 90% of the council seats. Sunday's elections could force the central government in Beijing to rethink how to handle demonstrations that began almost 6 months ago over a now abandoned extradition bill. Joining me now by Skype from Bedminster, New Jersey with his analysis is Gordon Chang, an expert in Asian foreign policy and author of The Coming Collapse of China. Gordon, welcome back to the broadcast. How significant are these election results and what message does it send to Beijing?
Beijing must be stunned right now because this completely undermines their narrative. Their narrative going into this was that Hong Kong people were sick and tired of the disruptions of the young protesters clad in black. And they made this vote a referendum because their rallying cry was kick out the black forces. That didn't work. You had almost 90% of the votes were for pro-democracy candidates. And that means that Beijing is just really bewildered at this point, really left without a strategy.
Well, even with the election results, pro-democracy demonstrators still have multiple demands that have been unmet. Do you think we'll see any more concessions from Chief Executive Carrie Lam in light of these election results?
Well, I think if Carrie Lam were smart, she would try to make concessions to divide the pro-democracy camp. This is what Beijing had tried in the past, and it was moderately successful. But right now, society is so united, so I'm not even sure that tactic will work. Carrie Lam is really not the person who is making the decisions right now. These decisions are made by Xi Jinping. And that's why this is so important, because people in Hong Kong realize this was a referendum not on the candidates or whoever. This was really just a vote on Xi Jinping in China. And the message is unmistakable.
So noting that, and again, I know it's hard to predict the future, but where do you think Hong Kong goes from here? I mean, do you think we'll see a reconciliation or are there going to be more protests in the future?
We're going to see more protests in the future because I think reconciliation right now is very difficult. Hong Kong society is much more divided than it's been in the past. It is politicized. Xi Jinping is a tough guy. He's not going to take this lying down. And I think that he's trying to press the advantage. So I think the turmoil could even become sharper in the future.
Well, noting the President Xi Jinping and noting all of these months of demonstrations, how do you think, or do you think this will impact U.S.-China relations?
It will have to have some impact on U.S.-China relations. I actually don't know where this will go. President Trump right now has on his desk the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act. He has not said that he will sign it, but there's going to be a lot of pressure for him to do that, especially in light of this vote. But Beijing, I'm sure, is going to put Hong Kong at the top of the list of things it wants to talk about with the United States. That's not our priority, but China's going to be driving this, and so it will have a significant impact on our ties.
So why do you think President Trump hasn't signed that measure?
Well, I think President Trump believes that if he signs the measure, that if he elevates Hong Kong's human rights and democracy, that he will anger the Chinese and not get a trade deal. That actually is in accordance with the way American presidents have thought for 4 decades, trying to engage Beijing. And that's absolutely the wrong approach, because right now Beijing is stalling on trade because it hopes that President Trump won't press Hong Kong or Xinjiang or democracy in China itself. And so if Trump wants a trade deal, and I don't think a trade deal is a good idea, but if you think a trade deal is a good idea, President Trump should be pressing on all these issues because that would force Beijing to come to terms on trade. And right now it's stalling.
Well, like you say, there are so many important issues here, and it's important that we bring them to light and continue to talk about them. Gordon Chang, author of The Coming Collapse of China. Thanks so much for talking with us.
Thanks, Wyatt.
Up next, analysis of whether the Democrats or Republicans are winning so far in the impeachment investigation into President Donald Trump. And it's looking more like Christmas in the nation's capital. Democratic House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff says he won't rule out the possibility of his committee undertaking more depositions and hearings in the impeachment inquiry of President Donald Trump. Schiff's staff and others are compiling the panel's findings to submit to the House Judiciary Committee, which is expected to open its own hearings to consider articles of impeachment and a formal recommendation of charges. Democrats argue President Trump pushed Ukraine to launch investigations into political rival former Vice President Joe Biden. They say the president leveraged his office for political gain. Joining me now with his analysis is Jay Caruso, managing editor of the Washington Examiner magazine. Jay, welcome into the studio.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Do you think the Democrats will move forward and bring articles of impeachment? And based on everything you've heard, is there enough evidence for that?
Well, at this point, I don't know if the evidence is that important. I think they're going to bring the articles of impeachment. They're going to probably impeach on several different fronts, probably bribery, which is the reason why they started using that term, abuse of power, probably, and also maybe contempt of Congress, something of that nature. But I definitely think it's going to happen. They've been building towards this for so long, and they were looking for a good way to do it, and I think this gives them that opportunity.
Various polls show the American people are pretty evenly split when it comes to whether the president should be impeached or not, with many still, of course, undecided. So have the Democrats, do you think, been effective in making their case to voters ahead of the 2020 elections?
I don't know. I mean, the split in people, it's pretty much the same. It hasn't changed. Impeachment got a bump about 2 weeks ago, but since then it seems to have died down. It's gone back down to that kind of even split among people. I am not sure. It depends on what Adam Schiff can also get. If there's a paper trail that they can dig up showing emails between the president and Mick Mulvaney or something that is beyond what we've seen so far, that's what it's going to take to get a majority to kind of, to go beyond what we've already seen so far.
Okay, so we're going to continue to follow the impeachment inquiry, but turning to the field of Democratic candidates for 2020, I want to get your thoughts on this, especially your reaction to the official entry of former New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg into this race. Let's start first with just a financial perspective on this. What do you think of that?
Well, he's got a net worth of $52 billion. He said he's going to spend his own money. He's already spent $30 million in ad buys just to kind of introduce himself to people. He will not take any donations. He's going to be formidable in that respect, but the polling so far shows him down way at the bottom. And skipping the early contests, Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, going straight for the Super Tuesday races, it all depends on how well his advertising strategy works. But at the same time, Bloomberg is not the most likable politician in the world, and so it's a matter of he hasn't even been really, people haven't really seen him, and people from New York tend to think New York is the center of the universe, but you talk to people in Iowa, they probably have no idea who Mike Bloomberg is for the most part.
And just to follow up on that, the news service, Bloomberg, that bears his name, said Sunday it would not investigate him or any of his Democratic rivals, and Bloomberg Opinion will no longer run unsigned editorials. What sort of ethical issues do you think Bloomberg's running raises?
I think that's a terrible decision on their part. Not only are they not going to investigate Michael Bloomberg, they're not going to, like as you said, they're not going to investigate other Democratic rivals, but they will continue to investigate Donald Trump. So that's an ethical issue that I think is going to extend to other news organizations that utilize Bloomberg. I don't know how they can go along with that. It seems unconscionable that they would basically cast aside everything that is critical to journalism and trust in journalism for the sake of their boss who's running for president.
What do you think about his entering means for the other Democratic candidates? Should they be worried?
The only thing I can think of is that he's got deep pocketbook, and he can go into the race very far, even if he's not polling very high. He can just continue to fund himself, and he could just be hanging around. The Iowa caucuses are 60 days away, so he could cause a little bit of trouble in that respect. But I don't see him as one that can necessarily skyrocket to the top of the list.
Okay, we'll be following that and all of these other election issues. Jay Caruso, managing editor of the Washington Examiner magazine, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me on.
Finally tonight, it's beginning to look a lot like Christmas, at least in the nation's capital. First Lady Melania Trump welcomed the White House Christmas tree today. The Douglas fir comes from Pennsylvania and is 23 feet tall. The annual White House Christmas tree lighting is December 5th. And at the U.S. Capitol, workers installed a 60-foot blue spruce Christmas tree. It weighs more than 9,000 pounds, and it traveled from D.C. from New Mexico. Just a reminder, there are 30 days until Christmas, just in case you're counting. And that wraps up our newscast for tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We'll be back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless.